They say offense wins games, but defense wins championships. Well, these 10 defenses didn't just win championships. They terrorized quarterbacks, shattered records, and left entire franchises traumatized. From bone-crunching linebackers to no-fly zones in the secondary, these are the top 10 most dominant, violent, and downright unfair defenses in NFL history. And trust me, if your team had to play them, thoughts and prayers. The 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers didn't just play defense, they imposed it like a law. If you suited up against them that season, you weren't just facing a football team, you were stepping into a 60-minute cage match where pain was guaranteed and points were optional. Statistically, this was the most dominant defense of its era. They finished the regular season ranked first in total defense, first against the pass, first in yards allowed, and first in points allowed per drive. Teams averaged just 237.2 total yards and 13.9 points per game against them, which wasn't just league leading, it was miles ahead of the competition. Opposing quarterbacks were routinely harassed, with the Steelers racking up 51 sacks and forcing a ridiculous number of 3rd and longs. They held opponents to under 300 yards in 14 of 16 games and under 200 passing yards in 12 of those. It wasn't just a good defense, it was a brick wall laced with barbed wire and loaded with TNT. At the center of it all was James Harrison, the league's Defensive Player of the Year and the kind of guy you'd cross the street to avoid. He finished the season with 16 sacks and 7 forced fumbles, routinely turning offensive lines into revolving doors. On the back end, you had Troy Polamalu, a heat-seeking missile with divine instincts and a head full of hair flying all over the field. He picked off 7 passes that year, including multiple game clinchers, and delivered hits that echoed into the following week. And just when quarterbacks thought they might get a break from Harrison's wrath, Lamar Woodley came charging in from the other side, adding 11.5 sacks of his own and becoming a wrecking ball in the postseason. He recorded 2 sacks in each of the Steelers' 3 playoff games. This defense was so complete, so smothering, that even the so-called role players were nightmares. Casey Hampton was a literal wall at nose tackle. Ike Taylor blanketed top receivers. Lawrence Timmons and Ryan Clark delivered punishment over the middle like bouncers at a dive bar. But dominance doesn't mean anything if it doesn't show up when it matters, and this defense saved its nastiest for the biggest stage. In Super Bowl 43, they squared off against Kurt Warner and the white-hot Arizona Cardinals, a team averaging nearly 34 points per game in the playoffs. Pittsburgh's defense smothered them early, completely neutralized the run, and took Warner off his rhythm for most of the night. Then came the play that turned a championship into a legacy. James Harrison's 100-yard interception return for a touchdown just before halftime, the longest play in Super Bowl history, and the definition of a momentum nuke. The 2008 Steelers weren't just great, they were a terrifying, all-consuming force of nature. And they kick off this list as the 10th greatest defense in NFL history. In the number 9 spot is one of the first dominant defenses of the Super Bowl era. The 1969 Kansas City Chiefs weren't just a great defense, they were a historically nasty group that straight up bullied the rest of the AFL, then rolled into the Super Bowl and punked the NFL's best. This wasn't your typical bend don't break unit, this was a take your lunch money, toss you in the dirt, tell your mama about it kind of defense. They finished the season ranked first in points allowed and first in total defense in the AFL, giving up just 12.6 points per game, and they did it against an offensive era that was anything but soft. They allowed only 177 total points in 14 games, just 12 touchdowns the entire regular season. Let that sink in. Over 14 games, they basically dared you to score and then laughed when you couldn't. What made this defense legendary wasn't just their talent, it was how complete they were at every level. The defensive line featured Buck Buchanan, a 6'7" freak of nature who overpowered double teams like they were made of tissue paper. Alongside him was Curly Culp, the kind of nose tackle who made entire offensive lines regret showing up. Behind them stood a linebacking core led by Willie Lanier, a violent genius who played like a sledgehammer with a doctorate in offensive dissection. And in the secondary, good luck. Quarterbacks basically had 2 options: throw at Emmett Thomas and risk an interception, or throw at Jim Marsalis and risk a hospital visit. Together, the Chiefs had 5 future Hall of Famers on defense, and every single one of them played like it. Then came the postseason, where they got even nastier. In the divisional round, they held the New York Jets, Joe Namath's Jets, to just 6 points. 1 year earlier, Namath had embarrassed the NFL in Super Bowl III. In 1969, Kansas City made sure there was no sequel. Then came the AFL title game against the Raiders, a team that had beaten them twice during the regular season. Kansas City didn't care. They picked off Darryl LaMonica 5 times and held the league's highest scoring offense to a single touchdown. That win sent them to Super Bowl IV against the mighty Minnesota Vikings, a team with the NFL's best record. Didn't matter. The Chiefs' defense wrecked them too. They forced 5 turnovers, held the Vikings to just 67 rushing yards, and completely neutralized Fran Tarkenton. Kansas City walked away with a 23-7 victory, securing the franchise's first championship and delivering a statement to the entire football world. The AFL wasn't just catching up, it had arrived with a vengeance. The number 8 spot belongs to the 1986 New York Giants, who didn't just field a great defense, they unleashed an all-out war on opposing quarterbacks. This was a group built in the image of their head coach Bill Parcells, tough, disciplined, and absolutely ruthless. But it was defensive coordinator Bill Belichick who turned them into a tactical terror, engineering one of the most aggressive, intelligent, and physical defenses the NFL had ever seen. The Giants finished the season 2nd in total defense, 2nd in points allowed, and 1st in rush defense, giving up just 80 yards per game on the ground. Offenses simply couldn't move the ball. Every snap felt like a trap, and more often than not, the Giants brought the hammer down. At the center of the chaos was Lawrence Taylor, who wasn't just the best linebacker in football, he was the most feared human being in the league. LT racked up 20.5 sacks, forced 3 fumbles, and won NFL MVP, an award that almost never goes to defensive players. He didn't play linebacker so much as he hunted quarterbacks for sport, with a combination of speed, violence, and pure insanity that hadn't been seen before, and hasn't really been matched since. But it wasn't just Taylor. The front 7 was loaded. Leonard Marshall was a beast off the edge. Jim Burt clogged up the middle like a brick wall with bad intentions. Harry Carson and Carl Banks were brilliant and brutal at linebacker, cleaning up anything that got past the first wave and delivering hits that should have come with a warning label. Then there was the secondary, less flashy but deadly efficient. Mark Collins and Terry Kinnard patrolled the back end and weren't afraid to jump routes or lower the boom on receivers dumb enough to cross the middle. Every level of the defense was in sync, and every player bought into Belichick's ever-changing game plans that disguise blitzes, confuse protections, and punish mistakes. The result? Carnage. The Giants won 12 straight games to finish the regular season at 14-2, and then they hit the playoffs like a wrecking ball. They shut out Joe Montana and the 49ers 49-3 in the divisional round, with Montana getting knocked out of the game on a vicious hit by Leonard Marshall that looked like it should have ended a career. Then they blanked the Redskins 17-0 in the NFC Championship, making it 2 straight playoff shutouts at home. And in Super Bowl 21, they finished the job, holding John Elway and the Broncos to just 10 points and dominating the second half like a team playing with cheat codes. 7 is another throwback to 2002, this time in Florida. The 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't just have a great defense, they had a defensive masterpiece, the kind of unit that could win games by itself and ruin careers in the process. This team was built like a tank, operated like a scalpel, and celebrated like a pack of wolves. Under the guidance of defensive coordinator Monty Kiffin, they perfected the Tampa 2 scheme, zone coverage layered with discipline, speed, and bone-breaking physicality, and turned it into the most dominant force in football that year. Tampa finished 1st in total defense, 1st in points allowed, and 1st against the pass, holding teams to just 12.3 points per game and forcing a league-high 38 turnovers. Opposing quarterbacks had a league-worst 48.4 passer rating against them. That's not just a defense, that's a no-fly zone backed by a hit squad. At the core of it all was Derek Brooks, the cerebral assassin at weak-side linebacker who played with perfect instincts and ran like a safety. He recorded 118 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 3 defensive touchdowns on his way to winning Defensive Player of the Year. Up front, Warren Sapp was a one-man wrecking crew, eating interior linemen alive and collecting 7.5 sacks from the defensive tackle spot, while also serving as the emotional spark plug of the entire team. Simeon Rice came screaming off the edge with 15.5 sacks, often looking like he was shot out of a cannon. And then there was John Lynch, the enforcer in the secondary, who made receivers think twice before stretching out for a catch. Throw in corners like Rondé Barber, who snagged 3 picks and constantly disrupted passing lanes. And Brian Kelly, who added 8 interceptions, and you had a defense with speed, power, and insane football IQ at every level. They didn't just show up during the regular season, they got even better when the lights got brighter. In the playoffs, the Bucs allowed just 3 offensive touchdowns across 3 games. In the NFC Championship against the Eagles, they walked into frigid Philadelphia and shut down Donovan McNabb, picking him off and forcing him into checkdowns all game. But the crowning moment came in Super Bowl 37 when the Buccaneers unleashed an apocalyptic beatdown on the Oakland Raiders. Facing the league's #1 offense, led by league MVP Rich Gannon, Tampa Bay forced 5 interceptions, 3 of which were returned for touchdowns. The final score was 48-21, but it felt even worse if you were wearing silver and black. The game was effectively over by halftime and the Bucs were dancing by the 4th quarter. The 6th spot belongs to another defense from 1969, this time from Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings didn't just field a dominant defense, they created one of the most iconic and feared units in NFL history, the Purple People Eaters. The name alone tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't a defense built to bend and hold, this was a unit built to obliterate. They finished the regular season first in points allowed, giving up just 9.5 points per game, and led the league in turnovers forced with 49. That's not a typo. 9.5 points per game across 14 contests. No one could run on them. No one could pass on them. Most teams were lucky to cross midfield without bruises and shame. At the heart of it was a front 4 that belongs in a museum, if that museum also offers body armor. Alan Page, Carl Eller, Jim Marshall, and Gary Larson were a relentless, suffocating quarterback hunting machine. Page was a revolutionary interior lineman, quick, agile, and smart enough to diagnose plays before they unfolded. Eller came off the edge like a wrecking ball. Marshall was an Iron Man who never stopped moving, and Larson did the dirty work in the trenches that made the rest possible. Together, they didn't just pressure quarterbacks, they hunted them. The NFL didn't officially record sacks back then, but make no mistake, this line piled them up like trophies. Opposing offenses simply couldn't function. Their run game got stonewalled, their passing game collapsed under pressure, and by the 2nd quarter, most teams were just trying to survive. Behind the line, the defense was just as sharp. The linebackers, led by Roy Winston and Wally Hilgenberg, played with grit and intelligence, while the secondary, featuring Paul Krause, the NFL's all-time interception leader, made sure that any desperation throws turned into souvenirs. Krause picked off 5 passes that year and served as the last line of defense for an already impenetrable unit. Every level of the defense played fast, smart, and violent. They weren't just good, they were uniformly excellent, and they played as one cohesive, bloodthirsty organism. The Vikings stormed through the regular season to a 12-2 record, then destroyed the Rams in the divisional round and battered the Browns 27-7 in the NFL Championship game. But when they got to Super Bowl IV, something changed. Whether it was overconfidence, underestimation, or just running into a buzzsaw, the Vikings were outplayed by the Kansas City Chiefs and their own legendary defense. Minnesota's offense fell apart, and despite the defense's effort, they lost 23-7 in a stunning upset. It was a bitter end to an otherwise flawless season, but it doesn't erase what they accomplished. Dead in the middle of the list is a more recent defense, the 2015 Broncos. They were fast, violent, and downright unfair. Forget the Peyton Manning farewell tour narrative. This Super Bowl run wasn't about the quarterback. It was about a defense that dragged a creaky, turnover-prone offense to the finish line like it was carrying a wounded soldier through a war zone. This wasn't a defense that stepped up in moments. It defined the season from wire to wire. Denver finished first in total defense, first in passing defense, first in sacks, and 3rd in points allowed. They gave up just 283.1 yards per game, and did it while constantly bailing out an offense that turned the ball over 31 times. It didn't matter. This defense thrived on short fields, and made big-time QBs look like backups. What made them so devastating was how they attacked from every angle. Von Miller was a human tornado off the edge, finishing with 11 sacks in the regular season, and flipping the entire postseason on its head with his historic playoff performance. His speed, speed, bend, and explosion were impossible to block, and when the games really counted, he turned unstoppable. DeMarcus Ware, even in the twilight of his career, was still a nightmare on the opposite side, bringing pressure, leadership, and veteran nastiness. Inside, Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson controlled the trenches, while Brandon Marshall and Danny Trevathan cleaned up everything that made it past the line. But the real brilliance was in the secondary, aka the no-fly zone. Chris Harris Jr., Bradley Roby, TJ Ward, and Darian Stewart formed a unit that suffocated receivers and punished anything thrown over the middle. They disguised coverages, baited throws, and tackled with violent intent. The Broncos' defense didn't just limit big plays, they erased entire game plans. Quarterbacks dropped back only to find chaos in every direction. It was psychological warfare as much as physical domination. Then came the playoffs, where they cemented their legacy. In the AFC Championship, they faced Tom Brady and the 12-4 Patriots. Denver hit him 20 times and forced Brady into quick throws, bad decisions, and enough grass stains to fill a laundry bin. They intercepted him twice and won 20-18 in a defensive slugfest, but that was just the warm-up. The Super Bowl was where this defense became immortal. Going up against the 15-1 Panthers and MVP Cam Newton, the Broncos wrecked one of the most explosive offenses in modern memory. They sacked Newton 7 times, forced 4 fumbles, and never let Carolina get comfortable for even a second. Von Miller alone had 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and earned Super Bowl MVP honors in one of the most dominant championship performances ever. The final score was 24-10, but it felt like a beatdown from start to finish. The Broncos didn't just win, they suffocated the life out of a team that had steamrolled the entire league all year. Number 4 belongs to a team that was let down by an underwhelming offense, the 1991 Philadelphia Eagles. The 1991 Philadelphia Eagles were a defensive juggernaut dropped into a Greek tragedy. They didn't win the Super Bowl, they didn't even make the playoffs. But don't let the record fool you. This was arguably the most ferocious, statistically dominant defense of the modern era, and certainly the best to never get a fair shot at glory. In a season defined by chaos under center, where the Eagles cycled through 5 different quarterbacks, lost Randall Cunningham in week 1, and finished with 13 offensive touchdowns total, the defense said, "Fine, we'll just win games ourselves." And they damn near did. Statistically, the 1991 Eagles were out of this world. They finished number 1 in total defense, number 1 in rushing defense, number 1 in passing defense, number 1 in takeaways, number 1 in sacks, and number 1 in plays behind the line of scrimmage. That's not a typo. They didn't just lead the league in one category. They led in everything. Teams averaged just 3.0 yards per carry against them and were held to 221.8 total yards per game, a number that feels like it belongs in a different sport entirely. And it wasn't just about yardage. This defense created chaos. They forced 48 turnovers and collected 55 sacks, smothering everything in sight while the offense sputtered, stalled, and punted. The front 4 was a complete nightmare, a collection of monsters that broke schemes and bones alike. Reggie White, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, was still in his prime, using superhuman strength and technique to tear through double teams. Jerome Brown was a force of nature at defensive tackle, quick, violent, and nearly unblockable. Clyde Simmons racked up 13 sacks and wreaked havoc opposite White, while Mike Golich did the dirty work in the trenches. That defensive line was so good, they didn't need to blitz. They generated pressure with just 4 and collapsed pockets with frightening consistency. Behind them was a linebacking core led by Seth Joyner, who had a season for the ages: 110 tackles, 6.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, and 4 forced fumbles. He could blitz, cover, hit, spy, you name it, he did it. Byron Evans patrolled the middle with authority, and William Thomas added speed and range to an already overwhelming group. And then came the secondary, hard-hitting, opportunistic, and fearless. Eric Allen was one of the best corners in the league, picking off 5 passes and locking down wide receivers all year. Wes Hopkins and Andre Waters brought the pain at safety, patrolling the back end with a level of violence that would draw flags, fines, and probably jail time today. And yet, for all their brilliance, the Eagles finished 10-6 and missed the playoffs due to tiebreakers. They outgained their opponents by a wide margin in nearly every game, but the offense was so anemic, so snake-bitten, that the defense had to hold teams under 14 just to have a shot. They did win 10 games, somehow, with guys like Pat Ryan, Brad Goebel, and Jeff Jeff Kemp throwing passes. The defense held 7 teams to under 10 points and gave up just 5 rushing touchdowns the entire season. But even the greatest units can't score all the points. Number 3 is the first one I think might bring some controversy because I know to many they should be number 1. The 2000 Baltimore Ravens didn't just play defense, they made it feel like punishment. This team didn't just stop you, they took your will to compete, your game plan, and your pride, then buried it all somewhere outside the numbers. There are dominant defenses in NFL history, but none quite like this. The Ravens gave up just 165 points across 16 games, an NFL record for a 16-game season. That's 10.3 points per game. They allowed 970 total rushing yards on the season, less than 61 yards per game. For context, some teams now give up 61 yards on a single drive. They pitched 4 shutouts, gave up 0 offensive touchdowns in their final 4 regular season games, and were so airtight in the red zone that field goals felt like major wins for opposing teams. The heart, soul, and grim reaper of this unit was Ray Lewis, who won Defensive Player of the Year with 137 tackles, 3 interceptions, and more impact plays than can be quantified. He didn't just lead the defense, he orchestrated it, diagnosing plays like a coach and finishing them like a hitman. Around him was a cast of chaos agents, Tony Siragusa and Sam Adams, 2 massive, immovable objects who clogged the middle and freed up Lewis to roam. On the edge, Peter Boulware and Rob Burnett brought constant pressure, and in the secondary, pure violence and speed. Chris McAllister and Dwayne Starks locked down receivers, while Rod Woodson, already a Hall of Famer in waiting, served as the savvy veteran presence. And then there was Kim Herring and Corey Harris, flying around like heat-seeking missiles, cleaning up anything that crossed into their zone. But the real statement came in the postseason. The Ravens offense, led by Trent Dilfer, who managed more than he delivered, was one of the worst to ever win a title. That didn't matter. The defense did all the talking. In the wildcard round, they beat Denver 21-3 and didn't allow a touchdown. In the divisional round, they stomped the Titans 24-10, and the defense scored a go-ahead touchdown on a blocked field goal return. Because of course they did. In the AFC Championship, they shut down the Raiders 16-3, knocking Rich Gannon out of the game and intercepting 2 passes. And in Super Bowl 35, they delivered a masterpiece, completely dismantling the New York Giants in a 34-7 beatdown where the Giants' lone touchdown came on a kickoff return. The Ravens defense answered that with a touchdown of their own on the very next play, just to be petty. Coming in second place is one of the most iconic defense of all time. The 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers defense wasn't just dominant, they were borderline mythical. In a decade full of brutal, low-scoring football, this unit still stood out for how absurdly suffocating they became. Over the final 9 games of the regular season, Pittsburgh went 8-1, and the defense gave up 28 total points. That's 3.1 points per game over more than half a season. They pitched 5 shutouts, held opponents to single digits in 8 of 9 games, and allowed just 2 touchdowns the entire stretch. In today's NFL, giving up 2 touchdowns in 2 games is impressive. This group allowed 2 in 9, and this wasn't against scrubs either. They shut out playoff-bound teams like the Houston Oilers and the New York Giants and held division rivals to absolute nothingness. It was domination by strangulation. This version of the Steel Curtain had Hall of Famers at nearly every level. Up front, Joe Green, the emotional anchor and interior wrecking ball, was still drawing double teams and collapsing pockets. L.C. Greenwood and Dwight White came flying off the edge, and Ernie Holmes delivered interior pressure that would give modern offensive coordinators nightmares. Behind them, Jack Lambert and Jack Ham made up the nastiest, smartest linebacking duo in NFL history. And in the secondary, you had guys like Mel Blount, who literally changed the rules of football because of how dominant he was. At 6 feet 3 inches, 205 pounds, Blount bullied receivers at the line, shadowed them downfield, and picked off 6 passes that year, despite teams being too terrified to even throw in his direction. The rest of the secondary played physical, assignment-sound football, backed by a ferocious pass rush that rarely gave quarterbacks time to breathe. The defense didn't just hold the fort in 1976, it carried the team. The Steelers won those final 9 games with backup quarterbacks under center and a run-first, grinded-out offense that relied heavily on Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier, until both went down injured in the playoffs. In the divisional round, Pittsburgh still shut out the Colts 40-14, with the defense scoring and smothering. But by the AFC Championship game, without Bradshaw, Harris, or Bleier, they just couldn't overcome the Raiders, losing 24-7 despite the defense fighting tooth and nail all game. Finally, at the number 1 spot, it should be obvious. The 1985 Chicago Bears weren't just the best defense of all time. They were a cultural phenomenon, a football revolution, and a full-blown act of violence dressed in navy and orange. They didn't just beat you, they humiliated you, choked you out, and danced on your grave afterward. They were mean, fast, brilliantly coached, and possessed a swagger that made every game feel like a hit job. They finished the regular season 15-1, led the league in points allowed, yards allowed, turnovers forced, and sacks. But even those god-tier stats don't tell the whole story, because watching them play felt like watching a crime scene in progress. Up front, you had Dan Hampton, Richard Dent, Steve McMichael, and William the Refrigerator Perry, a front four that didn't just control the line of scrimmage, they owned it. Dent racked up 17 sacks and was named Super Bowl MVP. McMichael was an interior menace. Hampton was the heart and soul, a Hall of Famer who drew double teams like magnets. And then there was the linebacker core, the nastiest trio in NFL history. Mike Singletary was the general, the eyes of the defense, diagnosing plays before the offense even finished the huddle. He delivered speeches with his pads. Otis Wilson was the heat-seeking missile coming off the edge, and Wilbur Marshall was the hammer that dropped when you least expected it. The secondary didn't get the same headlines, but they were every bit as important. Dave Duerson and Gary Fensick patrolled the back end with a nasty streak and a nose for the football, while Mike Richardson and Leslie Frazier blanketed receivers long enough for the pass rush to eat quarterbacks alive. They weren't lockdown corners in the traditional sense, but they didn't need to be. Nobody had time to throw. Then came the postseason, where they turned from bullies to straight-up executioners. In the divisional round, they shut out the Giants 21-0, making Phil Simms look like he'd never seen a football before. In the NFC Championship, they blanked the Rams 24-0, holding Hall of Fame running back Eric Dickerson to 46 yards and sending him home with bruises and bad memories. That made them the first team in NFL history to record back-to-back shutouts in the postseason. And then came Super Bowl 20, where they absolutely demolished the New England Patriots 46-10. The defense forced 6 turnovers, sacked the quarterback 7 times, and held the Patriots to 7 total yards in the first half. It was a beating so thorough that the Bears were doing choreographed dances before the game was even over. Those are my personal rankings for the top 10 defenses of all time, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you liked this video, check out our last one where we ranked every first overall pick from the 90s from worst to best. Also subscribe so we can 15,000 subscribers.